Okay.
All right, folks, let's just go ahead. We'll get people back in. But I actually want to go to, I guess it's page 5, and I have topic number 5. It's on the screen. 2 events preparatory to the Passion Week. And I want to do these 2 in the next hour, and that'll set us up to introduce the Sunday morning, the triumphal entry. We'll do that tomorrow morning. Well, we'll get into the days of the week. All right, 2 events that are preparatory to the Passion Week. And what I mean by that is it seems to me in the narrative, as the narrative unfolds, you've got to start with these 2. And the first one is, matter of fact, I am going to, all right, now I thought I had this set up. I may have to take them. No, there it is, right there. I'm going to use this PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint, now there is a Dropbox, and one of the folders in that Dropbox is all the material, these notes and all that sort of thing, and I'll put this PowerPoint in there just in case you're interested, for heaven's sake. But at any rate, I need some. So, yeah, here it is. Events which culminate in the triumphal entry. The first one is a remarkable prophecy, and there's a lot going on here in terms of geography and so on, so I'm going to walk you through it. But let me take you first of all to I'm looking for the Bible. What do I do with the Bible, for heaven's sakes? I think it was in here. All right, I'm going to open it. It'll take me. Luke 13. I'm going to take you to Luke 13 and verse 31. And, well, without trying to background it over much, this is an event which happens about 4 months before the Passover at which Jesus will die. Listen, the chronology of Jesus' ministry early, the first 2.5 years, is really pretty difficult. You just don't have many hard markers. The last year of Jesus' ministry, John, bless his heart, John is writing late. He knows you have the synoptics, his readers have the synoptics, and he's deliberately synchronizing and supplementing and so on, and he gives us several feasts. And so we can nail it down to the day, and that is these markers. So there are 4 Passovers, 3 explicit, 1 quite clearly suggested in Jesus' ministry. In John, we have 4 Passovers. The third, and by the way, if you have 4 Passovers, then here are my 4 Passovers, then you got 3 years in between, right? And before that first Passover, there was the cleansing of the, actually that happened, there was the baptism in the wilderness and so on. And then after the last Passover, you have 40 days. That's your 3.5 years. Do you have it banging around in your head that Jesus' ministry was 3.5 years? Well, that's it. In between those 4 Passovers, and then a few months out here and a few months out there. Well, the third of those 4 Passovers is when Jesus feeds 5,000. And shortly after that, Jesus goes to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. That's John 7, 8, and 9. If any man thirst, let him come unto me. Man born blind, and so on. Tabernacles is in the fall of, as a matter of fact, I think I give it to you on that chart. Let me look real quickly. The date. Tabernacles, all right. I'm going to argue that, and we'll not spend a lot of time with this, but the way I reconstruct the week, number 1, I am going to argue that Jesus died in 33 A.D. Now, there have been various ideas. Today, I don't know anybody who doesn't go with either 30 or 33, for what it's worth. And what's at stake here is, we know that Pilate was the procurator when Jesus died, and we know that he reigned from 26 to 36. So now, and I'm also going to argue, and I know that there are debates about this. My own pastor rather strongly disagrees with me, that's fine, that's lovely. But I'm going to argue for a Friday crucifixion, all right? We don't have to, I'll give you a chart that kind of defends a little bit. But, and I know that you haven't always been taught that, okay? So, but by the same token, and I know most of the arguments, matter of fact, I was taught Thursday. And for the first years that I taught Life of Christ, I taught Thursday, because that's what I was taught when I was in seminary. And then but it's entirely a fraternal, intramural discussion. But just to lay it down, so now Pilate reigns from 26 to 36 on, in that stretch, in what years was the 14th of Nisan on a Friday? Does that make sense to you? The 14th of Nisan is Passover. And Jesus dies in connection with Passover. And so you just get your calendar out, and so it comes down to 30 or 33. That's pretty much. But I don't mean, the fact is that that's what I'm going to argue for. So I was looking at that chart. If you look at that chart, I have, let me see, I think I have it included there. Yeah, I've got, here. Toward the bottom, I've got the Feast of Tabernacles in November. No, I don't have the exact dates here. All right, that wasn't worth it. At any rate, let's just do this, honest to goodness. The Passover at which Jesus feeds 5,000, that's the Passover in November of, it's the spring. It's the Passover in the spring of 32. And then you have 6 months, and then Jesus goes to Jerusalem, Luke 13 and verse 22, for the Feast of Dedication. All right, back up. Luke 13 has him going to Jerusalem. Doesn't say, John says that he was there for the Feast of Dedication, which is what, What's dedication? Happens in late December, 8 days. It's Hanukkah. It's what we know. Hanukkah celebrates, it's not biblical, it's not Levitical, it's an intertestamental, very, very important time when a family called the Hasmoneans were able to drive out the Syrians and recapture the temple, which had been much, the pig had been offered and all that, and they rededicated it. So the Feast of Dedication, John 10, verse 22, is a very delightful feast, and we know it as Hanukkah, it's dedication. That's in late December. So in December, Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, and I won't take you there, but you'll perhaps remember that during that time, John chapter 10, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And that so angers his Pharisaic enemies that they take up stones to stone him. And so Jesus is going to flee to Perea. Now, let me take you back here to the, here's a map that you may be familiar, but you should be familiar. It's a long way away, but Herod the Great ruled this entire area and beyond. Herod died. He's a dead guy. He died in 1 BC. You'll read 4 BC in a lot of places, but it was 1 BC. When he died, he's left his kingdom to 3 of his sons. Now, one of those was a man named Archelaus. And do you remember where Archelaus enters the New Testament narrative? Remember when Joseph and Mary came back from Egypt with the baby Jesus? They were there in Judea, but when they heard that Archelaus, remember that, was going to be king, he was a butcher. And so he was deposed in 6 AD. It was a huge event. And, all right, real quickly, in the Roman Empire, there were 2 types of governing regions. One was what's called a client kingdom, and that's where there was a king who was allowed to be the king, but you're working for us. He's a client king. But in many places, Rome had taken over many kingdoms, and so many places it was wisest just to leave the king in place, but he's entirely as a matter of fact, it's called a vassal king, V-A-S-S-A-L. At any rate, that was one type. The other type was where it was called a province, and Rome would dispatch an officer from Rome to rule over a given region. Does that make sense to you? Archelaus was deposed. He was given a part of his father's kingdom, but he was such a butcher, he was deposed. And Judea and Samaria, that's the wrong line here. Judea and Samaria were provincialized, and so there were prefects, officers. And the fifth of those was Pilate. So in Jesus' day, Pilate is in charge of Judea and Samaria. Now, we're going to talk about Pilate. I'll just tell you now, just to whet your appetite, see if this will say. I like to say I am the president and founder and president and CEO of the Pontius Pilate fan club. He's one of my greatest heroes. I can't say how much I admire the man Pontius Pilate. That's not what you usually hear. Read the gospel record and see if you can find reason not to. All right, let's leave that alone. But so Pilate is now, on the other hand, see if this makes any sense. Galilee and Perea, that's not well drawn. Perea over here and Galilee up here, that was the area of Herod Antipas. Now, Herod Antipas is one of those three sons, and he's really going to become important in the New Testament narrative, and he's really a rather remarkable guy. Now, let me just say this to you, and I mentioned this before, and this is one of the dynamics of Jesus' ministry that I think is often missed if we let Clark Kent into the room, and that is he was wise as a serpent. That's what he says to his disciples, Matthew 10, when he sends them out 2 by 2 in Galilee, and says, you are going in my name, and you have to represent who I am, and therefore be as wise as serpents. And the word he uses for wise there is not our Sophia word that we get familiar with. It's a word that means clever, strategizing, buying up every advantage against your enemy and so on, and putting your enemy. And Jesus was that just amazing. And but wise as a serpent, but never ever compromising any moral reality, scriptural. So wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. Jesus was that perfectly. And for that reason, when he was in Jerusalem, here, is this making any sense? But here is Jerusalem, and Jesus is there for the feast dedication. I and the Father are one. They pick up stones. And so John 10 and verse 40 says that he made his way down to Jericho and across the Jordan River. It's about 17 miles. Take him about 2 or 3 hours. It's very steep downhill. And he crossed over the Jordan into the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas. And I'll tell you why. Now, this is going to come together as we go, but let me just see if I can nail this down in your head right now. Very early on, well, let me back up one more step. Twice, Jesus cleanses the temple. Now, the first time he does this is at the first Passover. It's shortly after the water to wine, John chapter 2. When Jesus cleansed the temple, and this was not a matter of momentary pique, if you know what I'm saying. I think this was strategy, because when Jesus cleansed the temple, number one, he absolutely catapulted himself into Jewish worldwide notoriety. You can't overstate. Do you know what's going on? It's Passover. You got to bring a lamb. The priests who run the place, the Sadducees, the high priests, they're crooked, and they're cheating people in every way. And plus, when Herod, all right, I'm asking a lot of you. We're talking about different. There are 4 generations of Herod in the New Testament. The patriarch is Herod the Great. All right, but he only shows up in the narrative when he tries to kill the baby. Herod the Great dies just weeks after Jesus is born. But Herod the Great built this temple, and this marvelous, he redid Zerubbabel's second temple. But the point to be made is simply that in order to do that, he imposed, Rome allowed him to impose, listen, Herod was a genius. He was a madman. He was a maniac. He was a genius in every way. One of the greatest minds who ever lived. And he figured out how to make money for Rome. So he could get away with anything because he was the cash cow of the Roman Empire. And probably the most important, he did three things. Number one, he built a harbor. No, number one, he controlled the trade routes. Number two, he built a harbor, artificial harbor. It was a marvelous harbor. When he did that, he captured the silk trade, silk and oil. It was called the Silk Road, but oil that came up from Saudi Arabia. Oil, and I'm talking, the kind you splash on yourself, right? That was tantamount in terms of its role in the economy to petroleum to our culture. Oil was everything. It was so expensive. I like to tell people that in the time of the Bible, there were two elements of life which we take very much for granted because they're very accessible, which were very expensive. And that is scent and color. It was very expensive to have bright colors or beautiful scent. And so Herod was able to capture all that spice trade. Why am I saying this? But it had to come up through Israel. But then it would go down to the Mediterranean, go up either to Tyre or down to Alexandria. He captured that. You go to Caesarea Maritima today and walk around, you see these huge warehouses that he built. He's making money. And a lot of that's going to Rome. But the big one was he redid the second temple, the temple of there in Israel, in Jerusalem. And Rome allowed him to impose a 2-day tax on every Jew in the world. It's called the temple tax. And every Jew in the world had to pay that temple tax. And you say, well, big deal. Who's going to collect that? He didn't have to collect it. Every synagogue, every village, every settlement and so on, once a year they'd get together and they'd hire a little army and they would put and they would send them off. And Augustus, the Caesar, had imposed a special horrible penalty on any robbers who fell on those Jewish delegations bringing the money to Jerusalem. Because when they got there, a lot of it was going to go to Rome. Does that make sense to you? All right, so what? No matter what, the point is that the Sadducees who were running the temple, they accepted the duty to collect those temple taxes, but they demanded you do it in a really unusual currency from Tyre, and therefore everybody had to change their money, and they were robbing them blind when they did it. So my point is, Jesus early on comes to the temple. There are all these abuses. They are absolutely enraging. The Jews hated this, but I always say you can't go down the street and start the Second Baptist Temple. You know what I'm saying? You're stuck with this one. And so now my point is, think about this. I like to say, I don't care who it was. I don't care what had happened. There was nobody in that place who had ever seen anything as exciting as when that strange Nazarene grabbed a cord and started to throw tables over, and there were no angels, there was no miracle. He just began to, and that quick he would have been, the wildly popular hero of the masses. So by doing that, immediately he cast himself, like I say, you couldn't find a Jesus t-shirt in the entire Mediterranean world, you know what I'm saying? Honest to goodness. This is okay with the t-shirt, but I'm saying that would, and by the way, it's Passover. You got people from all over the world. What are they going to do in the morning? They're going to bus and go home. What do you think they're going to be talking about? All over the world. Now, he does something else. You're talking in the New Testament about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? Here's everything, I'll come to this later, but here's everything you have to know about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, there's a lot more you ought to know, but you're not getting started if you don't know this. The Pharisees run the synagogues, and they are revered by the common man. The Sadducees run the temple, and they are despised by the common man. Does that make sense to you? So when Jesus cleanses the temple, and by the way, as you know, they hated each other. Oh, my goodness. So when Jesus cleansed the temple that first time, whose turf was he on? How do you think the Pharisees felt about that? Oh, yeah, here we're on his side. Oh, he's our hero too, you know. Now, curiously, for the next better part of 3 years, Jesus is going to go across the land, synagogue to synagogue. Now whose territory is he on? And the Pharisees, you can watch it happen in the Gospels, the Pharisees are mad beyond words. And I think what Jesus did, not only did he make himself, the hero of the masses, but he set the Pharisees against the Sadducees. And now the Sadducees are mad or not, the Pharisees are enjoying this. And I imagine, I think you can almost see it happen, that the Pharisees are going to their Sadducean brother and say, we got to do something about this guy. Oh, and by the way, back up just one real quick moment. One impact, one very, very important effect of his becoming so wildly popular was that his enemies couldn't do Stephen to him. You know what I'm saying? If Stephen's a nobody. So even the Romans did not allow the Jews capital punishment. But if you want to grab some troublemaker, here, I'll keep backing up. Know this, that whoever those vassal kingdom or Roman officer, every officer, Pilate, Herod Antipas, Herod Philip, every one of them had two jobs. And that was, number one, collect the taxes. I like to say, and this is ancient history and it's hard to get in touch with, but the situation then was that Rome had spent itself into abject poverty with the most stupid, self-serving ideas and projects, and the only thing they could think of to do anything about it was to tax their citizens more heavily. Now, that's a long time ago, and it's hard for us to get in touch with that, but try and imagine that if you can. I'm being a little facetious. So, number one, collect the tax. Number two, keep the peace. Rome had a vast army, but it was spread way beyond. They had built, or they had demanded every province to build this marvelous road system, which Paul is going to use to spread the gospel, but that's not why they built those roads. They built them to get armies with all their equipment and wagons and so on quickly. So Rome had a vast empire, but the army was stretched beyond limits almost. And so if you can't keep the peace, you're in charge of this territory, and there's some riot, and we got to fetch armies from Alexandria or from Damascus, your head's going to roll. Whoever started that problem, your head's going to roll. That makes sense to you? So by reason of his popularity, his enemies couldn't just grab him and haul him out. In other words, very importantly, and this is huge to what we're going to talk about tomorrow, if they were going to be rid of Jesus, they had to get the Romans to do their dirty work. And the only way to get the Romans to do their dirty work was for the Sanhedrin. All right, everybody know the Sanhedrin? 70 men. Rome was the 500-pound gorilla slept wherever it wanted, okay? But it didn't want anything to do with your local stuff and your religion and so on. We don't want to mess with that. So there's some official body that's recognized by Rome, and they oversee the local administration of religion and so on. And that was the Sanhedrin. Just means council. Actually, every town had a Sanhedrin. It was a town council, but every village. But the big one, the one that had could approach the Roman officials, was the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, and they were about half of them were Pharisees and about half were Sadducees. See what's at stake? So now Jesus, wise as a serpent, catapults himself into popularity. Now his enemies can't just drag him behind the house and stone him. Their heads will roll. So they got to get Rome involved. But the Sadducees would love to do that. The Pharisees are enjoying this. Now for better part of almost 3 years, he goes up and down the countryside, synagogue to synagogue. And you can watch the Pharisees get more and more enraged. And then what does he do on Monday? But the Sadducees are dragging their feet. I can hear them saying, hey, when it was our ox getting gored, you weren't anywhere. You're on your own, boys, because they hate each other. But on Monday of the Passion Week, this is tomorrow, Jesus cleanses the temple a second time. Folks, he's signing his own death warrant. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's galvanizing the hatred of the Sadducees with the long, boiling hatred of the Pharisees. And it's going to take him 5 days to get him on a cross. So now I go way back to it. The point is simply that cleansing of the temple, the first time, catapult. And one of the questions, I'll just introduce it now, that I want to deliberate, especially tomorrow morning, is, You know, I said earlier that Jesus is going to go, he's going to be careful about it, but he is going to go up and down the countryside claiming to be Messiah King. Now, here's a very important question, and it's a question which most students of the life of Christ don't spend any time with. I think we should. And furthermore, it's a question, do you know the name Bart Ehrman? You know that name? Well, he teaches at the University of North Carolina, but he is kind of the go-to failed evangelical who is, great scholar who attacks the scriptures all the time. He spends his whole life. I mean, it's really an issue for us because we live in the shadow of the University of North Carolina. We've got a lot of students there, and I've had several of them come to me over the years and say, I don't know, I'm taking Bart Ehrman's class. I tell them, don't take that class, for heaven's sake. But at any rate, my point is, he mentions it all the time. So what is the question, Bookman? Simply this. Jesus goes up and down the countryside claiming to be king. Folks, number one, this is a time when the Roman Empire, it's fairly newly minted as an empire. And there are a lot of kingdoms and small, some large, and they had been conquered by Rome. I mean, Greece and Carthage for two of them. But the point is that there were a lot of royal families who are now just the boys living in this, you know what I'm saying? And Rome has this huge empire, and so my point is this: what they feared, they were absolutely paranoid. And I like to say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean nobody's following you. You know what I'm saying? And so they had good reason to be paranoid, but they were paranoid about pretender kings, sedition. And yet Jesus goes up and down the countryside claiming to be king. And I'll tell you something else. The one place on their entire empire where they had more seditious activity than other was Israel. Happened regularly. And the one place where it was the basic ruling principle with Rome was you don't raise your hand against Rome. If you do, we're going to put it down probably in hours. We're going to bring such overwhelming, gruesome force. And furthermore, the blood's going to run for months. Because not only do we not worry as Rome about collateral damage, it's part of the strategy. So here is, and again, these rebellions, these seditions would arise. The last one was 6 AD, when as I said, when Archelaus, and the other thing about it was, when Archelaus was deposed, I mentioned earlier. But the other thing about it is, it was so hard for the Romans to put down. Israel is like one big paintball arcade. I mean, it's just made for guerrilla warfare. And the Romans weren't good at that. They were good at overwhelming phalanx force. And so the one in 6 AD, it took them 2 years to put it down. Now, this is a problem because there are a lot of other little peoples on the edge of the empire thinking, what do you think about that? Maybe we should try this. So my point is that in the one place where they have the most seditious activity and they're most fearful of it, and it's hardest to put down, Jesus goes up and down like I say, claiming to be Messiah. Now, and my question is this: how did he get away with it? And that issue becomes crystallized in the triumphal entry. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. How did Jesus get away? Now, forgive me, I left something hanging out there. The one guy I hear talk about that is this skeptic, this very, very angry, miserable skeptic by the name of Bart Ehrman, and he's constantly saying, that's stupid. That's crazy. How could he get away with riding into the city and neither the Romans nor the Jews do anything about it? It's a good question. I think I can answer it for you. I think the Bible answers it for you. Does that make sense to you? Are with me just as to the question? All right, let me get back to it. So, what happens is Jesus is let me pick the story up. He's in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. They pick up stones. He goes to Perea. While he is there in Perea, now Perea is to the east. This over here is desert, all right? So there's a strip between the Jordan Rift and the Arabian Desert that's settleable, and it's called Perea. It was largely Gentile, but Jesus goes over to Perea, and when he does, thousands and thousands of people follow him. And let me say in that regard, try to pick up the ambiance of what's going on. Now, it's very late in Jesus' ministry. It's actually the last half of the last year. We're after the Feast of Dedication, which is in December, and before Passover, where he'll die. That's in April. So in those months, Jesus goes over to Perea. By now, he's been going up and down the land working miracles. I can't imagine. Can we still talk about degrees of separation? Do you know what do we mean by that? How many degrees of separation might there have been at that point, by this point, between anybody and somebody who had been healed by Jesus? Now think about it. You'd be hard-pressed to find everybody had a neighbor, a friend, a cousin, used to be blind, and now she sees, or baby that used to be, who knows? And so, and the excitement, and plus, listen, Jesus is the best show in town, just in terms of his enemies are so angry and they're following him around, and there's this great drama that never quits and so on. So when Jesus makes his way over to Perea, thousands of Jews from Judea, probably in Galilee even, they come over and they're following him as well. So you've got a huge crowd over there. Well, how do you think that made his Jewish enemies, primarily at this time the Pharisees, feel? They're madder than hops. So let me get to it finally. Luke 13 and verse 31. I'll go there. Oh, that's not what I want. All right, yeah. It says, on that very day, all right, I get lost if I spend too much time on it. On that very day, some Pharisees came saying to him, "Get out and depart from here, for Herod wants to kill you." All right, I've got some notes on this, but just very quickly. Number one, that's Herod Antipas. So clearly, Jesus is in the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, right? So you better get out of here. Now, listen, folks, honestly, I haven't got time to develop it, but it couldn't be more obvious. This is a cheap trick. These Pharisees, angry because they picked up stones to stone him just a little while ago, he escaped out of their hand. Now he's here in Perea. Oh, I never finished this thought, by the way. The Jews in Jerusalem and Judea could get Pilate to do their bidding. I could take you a long way through it, but Pilate had used up all of his coupons. He'd stepped in a couple of big cow pies, and in terms of his rule over there, and Tiberius had the Caesar. The Caesar when Jesus is born is Augustus. The Caesar during his ministry is Tiberius, his stepson. And so now, and Tiberius had to intervene on behalf of the Jews against Pilate a couple of times. Pilate knew he was on thin ice. Herod Antipas, they had no leverage over him. And so by going to the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, Jesus had escaped from the Jews who could have gotten Pilate. And that's what's going to happen, right? Before we're done. That's the story we're going to tell. They're going to get Pilate to crucify him. So Jesus was always in greater danger in Jerusalem and Judea than he was in either Galilee or Perea. So now he's in Perea, and here come these Pharisees, and they've got a great show of concern. You better get out of here because Herod wants to kill you. It's a cheap trick. Now, stay with me here. This gets a little thick. But he said to them, "You go tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I'll be perfected. Nevertheless, I must journey today, tomorrow, and the day following. For it cannot be," he tells kind of almost black humor, "it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside of Jerusalem." I don't have to worry until you get me back there. All right, now what's this all about? When he says, I'm gonna travel today and tomorrow, and the third day I'll be perfected. All right, now listen. I gotta stay with me. The Bible was written for an oral culture. In other words, it's going to be listened to. You're not going to read it. You're not going to see it. And you learn by listening to it. Well, for that reason, the author had to insinuate into the words on the page whatever he or she wanted of emphasis, of nuance. That makes sense. There are no underlining, no italics, and you don't even know for sure what inflection the reader is going to bring to it. So the words themselves, and there are, and especially Hebrew, and this is Hebrew. I mean, it's Greek, but he's speaking in Greek, but he's thinking in Hebrew, because Hebrew is rich with really clever, subtle ways to use the word. Listen, real quickly, just one of them. Elohim. What's curious about that word? Do you know what I'm asking? The name that we often use of God throughout Scripture, Elohim, it's plural, right? The im is plural. Why is that? Why when you talk about God, and we usually translate it God, but in the Hebrew it says God. That's what it says. There's no doubt about it. Well, it's a Hebrew nicety, nuance called the plural of majesty. And when you want to speak of something that is really important, even though it's singular, you use the plural. Half the time that the word Sabbath is used, both Old and New Testament, about half the time, it's in the plural, Shavuot. Now, it's talking about one day, but that day is so special. Does that make sense to you? And by the way, when you do that, you use singular pronouns, singular verbs, and so on, but you got this strange plural subject or noun. Why? Because that's a way that the hearer is going to hear that this is very special. That makes sense to you? Now, another one is what's called the numerical progression. Can you explain that to me? You're familiar with it because you can finish this verse. 6 things the Lord hates. What? Yea, 7 are an abomination. 3 things I don't understand. Yea, 4 are more than I can comprehend. Now, what's at stake there, it always expresses fullness or emphasis. So the point is not that God only hates those 7 things, but he really hates those things. So what is Jesus saying? I'm not going to fall for your cheap little trick. I'm going to travel today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day, yea, verily, today and tomorrow. So what he's talking, when the time is full, that's what he's telling him. I'm not going to come just because you try. When the time is full, when it's right, then I'll come. He's not talking about progressive. Does that make sense to you? It's very, very, it's all over the Old Testament. And Amos says, for 2 sins, yea, verily, for 3 will Moab be destroyed, and so on. It's always X, yea, verily, X plus 1. And the whole point is, let's say, fullness or emphasis. All right. Then Jesus says, and I want you to catch this, in verse 34, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. Now, and this is genuine. Jesus, he's in Perea. He's probably at least 25, 30 miles from Jerusalem, and yet he weeps over the city because these representatives of Jerusalem have come with murder in their hearts. And so from Perea, he weeps and he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I gathered you to myself. And this is, I don't know, I'm back to my Clark Kent warning. This isn't crocodile tears. Jesus is heartbroken. You know, you have that verse in John 1:11. And I think we can read this without too much passion. He came on to his own and what? Do you hear the passion in that? His own received him not. And here, his heart is, but now he knew that he was going to be rejected. He knew that this generation, he knew that from the scriptures at any rate, but it still broke his heart. And so he weeps, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen her brood under her wings. You were not willing. Your house is left to you desolate. Now, then he makes a prophecy, and this is what sets us up for the triumphal entry. He says this, I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now that verse, blessed is he who, matter of fact, I'll take you back there. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That is from Psalm 118. And I like to think, I think it's legitimate to think of Psalm 118 as a psalm of messianic inauguration. This is the song that Yahweh gave the children of Israel to teach them how to receive their king, their Messiah. And you're to cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, I'll tell you something. I'll just beat up on you a bit. There's another verse in this psalm, a couple verses earlier, that everybody in the room knows by heart. Do you know what it is? Everybody here knows what it is. I'll start it. This is the day. All right. It's a wonderful verse. And I know it's the habit, the noble habit of many to kind of get up in the morning and throw back the drapes, and this is the day which the Lord has made. I'm going to help yourself. But that's not what that verse is talking about. It's not talking about this or that verse. This or that day. Here it is right here. This is the day it's talking. You know what it's talking about? March 29th, 33 AD. It's talking about the day when Jesus, talking about the day when the long-awaited, promised Messiah presents himself to his people. And that's what the triumphal entry is. It is now all throughout his ministry, he's been claiming to be Messiah, carefully but clearly. But now on that day, in fulfillment, we'll see it tomorrow, of deliberate Old Testament promises, Jesus the Nazarene is going to offer himself to that generation dramatically, officially, carefully as the long-awaited Messiah. And the thing about it is, what this verse is saying is, only God could make this happen. This is the day which only God could make happen, the day of Messiah's appearance. And therefore, we will rejoice and be glad in what God has done. Does that make sense to you? It's a very, very special day. And that's why, of course, Jesus said the very stones would cry out if the children didn't sing. Now, there's one other verse, and that is verse 25. I have it there in green in that same psalm. Now, are you with me? I'm saying that this is a psalm which is teaching the Jewish people how to receive their Messiah. And they're to cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." In other words, that fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. And this is the day which the Lord has made. But the other song they are taught to sing, and they do sing, is "Save Now." Now, you can whether you know it or not. Can you say that in Hebrew? Anybody? What is it? Hosanna. Hoshana. Now, that word, Hoshana, Hosanna, has become something of just a praise word. It's delightful and so on, but it doesn't have any connotation. It does have a connotation. So hear what's going on. You have this marvelous psalm, and they are taught, this is the day only God could make. You will rejoice. You'll cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And you will acknowledge, God is teaching Israel, you will acknowledge this one as your only hope of salvation. You'll understand that promise, that seed promise back there in Genesis 3:15 is coming to pass, and this is the only one, this is the one God has provided who can actually crush the head of the tempter and undo. So now, here's the thing, and this is what I want to leave you with. It's about 4 or 5 months before, maybe not 5, maybe 4 months before the actual crucifixion. Jesus says to those angry, murderous Pharisees, "You're not going to see me until you cry out, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" He's saying, you're not going to see me until you welcome me as Messiah. And if you'd have been there that day, you'd have said, that is not going to happen. These Jewish leaders, these Pharisees, are mad beyond words already. They're only going to get more and more angry. They are powerful. They are set in their... That's not going to happen. It did happen. And there's kind of a twofold question I want us to ask tomorrow morning. Number one is, how did Jesus contrive to make it happen? I think it's in the record. We're going to trace that. And very closely related, answering with the same set of ideas, how in the world did he get away with it? That make sense to you? All right, now, the next step, I'm going to take just a few minutes. Let's go to John 11, and I have it on the sheets there, that the next event is the raising of Lazarus. Now, I'd love to spend a lot of time with this. It's so much fun, but let me just take you to John chapter 11. And John gives the entire chapter to this amazing story. Oh, so much I'd like to talk about, but well, all right, 2 points. Number one, Jesus, just a few months earlier, Jesus had spent, about a few weeks earlier, Jesus had spent about 6 weeks in Judea, saturating Judea. He spent 18 months in Galilee, because that's where most of the Jews lived, making the case for making the claims, Christ coming, God come in the flesh, and then miracles to prove it. Now he does it in Judea. And during that travel in Judea, he had made his way to Bethany. And in Bethany, he encountered this family of 2 sisters and a brother, Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And he got to know them. Remember that story? Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha was busy about business. Now, he's in Perea. He's still in Perea, and he gets a message, the one whom you love is sick. And then we're told, mysteriously enough, though I think we can get close to what's going on here, but we're told that there's a lot of conversation. I'd love to go through it and so on, but hold on here. Here it is in green. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, because he loved her, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed 2 more days. Well, that's a strange thing. He waits 2 days. Now, there's a lot of cross currents here that we could get into, but let me just say, I think it is, again, Jesus wise. It's really important that he shows up on the 4th day. To Martha and Mary's disappointment, to be sure, but it's hugely important. So that's what happens. He shows up. Now, I got to talk to you just a little bit, hurry up, Buckman, about Jewish burial customs. You know what? Read the Bible in terms of its own culture. Don't bring your culture to the Bible. And study it. And I'll tell you a couple of places to start, because they're fun, is burial and weddings. It's so different from the way we do it, and yet it's very recoverable. It's very, very entertaining. But burials, to talk about it very quickly, they normally buried in a cave tomb. And it was a tomb that was a cave that was cut out deliberately. You might be building a wall or a house, and you're going to pull out ashlars, building. So as you do, you leave a usable space. Might be an animal pen where the baby Jesus perhaps was born. But on the other hand, it might be a grave. And if it was, number one, there'd be a small opening, and these tombs were used for generations. And so as they carved out the cave, they would leave behind stone tables. And when a man died, there was a low opening. You had to get down because, all right, I'll explain that in a minute. But when a man died, you would lay his body, you would wash his body. If he was wealthy, you'd put that shroud. But then you would lay his body on that stone, one of those stone tables. I mean, a lot of times, I can take you to a tomb where there are, I think, how many of them in there? I think 6 of them in one tomb. You can see very clearly. They actually have little pillows carved out for the head. So you can see exactly where they laid the bodies. And because, all right, and you would lay the body there, and then you would take strips of perfumed cloth and just perfume, and you dip it in, and it might be what he had on when he died. You just rip it into strips, and then you would take that perfume cloth and you'd wrap his body. So by the time you got done, it almost looked like a mummy, but it wasn't a mummy because, very importantly, they did nothing to retard decay. There was no draining the blood. Immediately, the tissue, the blood began to settle. And the issue is that body begins to smell. Now, I've never been around this, but I've heard various people tell stories about, going into a place where a man had died and laid there for 2 days, and and that's why the perfume cloth, because there was nothing more important in that culture than properly caring for the body of one whom you loved who had died. And so the word would go out, and people would come as quickly as they could, and they would be there to commiserate, but they'd also be there to participate. So they'd take that cloth and wrap his body and so on as it lay there on that stone tomb, that stone table. But as the sun went down on day 3, you had to close the tomb. So and that start with the day he died. I don't care what time of day. That's day 1. Day 2. Day 3, you close the tomb. Why? What's at stake? Smell. It's all about smell. And you got to understand that normally tombs were in living areas. Remember John 19, the tomb of Jesus says, near the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. Whenever you encounter a garden in the Bible, it's a farm, okay? It's some sort of agriculture. Near the place, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb. I can tell you all about probably what's at stake there, but the point is that it's not like it's going to be off in a cemetery all by itself and somewhere. Even if they had a cemetery, it'd be a small area, and you'd have a number of family tombs. So the point is that you have a opening, the cave door, as it were, with a stone small enough that a couple people could get it in place. And as the sun goes down on the 3rd day, you actually take soil and so on, and you kind of chink, you fill that in, because that smell is awful. And it's probably near a walkway and so on. So the point is, so that's what's happened. Lazarus has died, and he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, let me just say, I think it's terribly important. The 4 day is important. Jesus waited for 2 days, I think, for 2 reasons. Number 1, when a man died and Lazarus was wealthy, and Bethany is just outside the city of Jerusalem, about 1.5 miles, and so a lot of people would be coming out to commiserate, maybe try and squeeze some money out of the sisters and so on. But the point is that there was a cycle of mourning, and the weekly cycle, and a monthly, and a yearly. And the high day of the first week was the 4th day. So if you couldn't get there any other day, you get there for the 4th day. So it's going to be a big crowd. And it seems to be because last night they actually sealed the tomb. So it's kind of closure. So you come on. But the other thing, the big issue is this, that the body he's been dead for 4 days. For the last 12, 14 hours, his body has been moldering in that little tiny cave. The stench would be awful. And you remember Martha is horrified. Martha was, I like to say, kind of can you still say this? I don't know, but kind of the Martha Stewart of her day. She was kind of the little homemaker, and she's always busy. And I'll tell you something, this would be a really serious social faux pas what's the word I want, to expose your guests who have come to, with this awful stench that's going to roll out of there. And so here's the scene. Jesus says, roll away the stone. Oh, no, you can't do that. No, I told you, Martha, you're going to see God's glory. And I think people would have been backing up and taking their cloaks and covering their nose. It really is powerful. But he does. And so he rolls away, and now that horrible stench comes rolling out of there and gets in your eyes and your mustache, But then Jesus, you know the story, Lazarus come out of there. Now he's bound hand and foot, I picture him. How do you get off the table without hurting himself? You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, he comes hopping out, and remember he was bound, his head was bound. Jesus says, cut him loose, let him go. I think he might have been thinking, he may suffocate, and we'll have to do this all over again, if you don't get. But at any rate, the point is that, here's the point. It's a big point. You go to a funeral, and as you leave that day, the guest of honor is at the garden gate. Thanks for being here. It was good to see you. You're going to go home talking about that. And this miracle set the Jewish world on its ear. I'm going to read it to you in just a minute. Well, let me do that and then make one other point. Because let's go to John 11. That's the story. Now John tells us the results, and as is his wont. And so in John 11, beginning of verse 45, it says, he's talking about the reaction to this miracle, and he says, many of the Jews, and know that John, the apostle, John the gospelist, the 4th gospel, not always, but almost always, when he uses the word Jews, he means the leadership, okay? And that's what he means here. Many of those Jewish leaderships that come to Mary, when they saw this, they believed in him. That's enough for me. But others went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus did. And then watch this, folks. develop the antenna. It says, then the chief priests and the Pharisees. The chief priests is the Bible word for Sadducees. These guys hate each other, but they found something that they can agree on. And when it says the chief priests and Pharisees gathered a council, that's that Sanhedrin. Now, I haven't got time to go all the way through it, but basically they said, what are we going to do? This man does many signs. And I'll tell you something, there's a biblical answer to that question. Sometimes I hear people kind of beat up on the Jews seek after a sign. They were taught to seek a sign. The reason Jesus refuses is because it was an evil and adulterous generation seeking a sign. But the point is that if a man comes to you and has a message or claims to be a messenger from God, and he does signs, I always say there are two responses. Number one, check the Scriptures to see if everything he is teaching is consistent with the Scriptures. If it is, bow the knee. That's God's way. So what are we going to do? He does many signs. Here's their answer. If we don't kill him, the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation. Now, what I want you to see, and this is setting you up specifically for tomorrow morning, because here in John 11, there are three results of the Lazarus miracle. The first one is in verse 53. From that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Now, folks, as a matter of fact, let me add to it verse 57, which says the chief priests and the Pharisees had made a command. If anyone knew where he was, he should report it that they might seize him. There's undoubtedly a price on his head. All right, number one. Tomorrow morning, we're going to break into the Passion Week. Know this. Jesus is a fugitive. His picture is on every city hall in the land. You know what I'm saying? He is a wanted man. So as we go through it, he's got to be so circumspect. The most powerful men in all of Israel are angry beyond words, and they are now determined between both. This is about 3 weeks before, I think, the triumphal entry. So number one, Jesus is a fugitive. Secondly, and this won't make a lot of sense tonight, but I'll make it make sense in the morning, I think. In verse 54, it says, therefore Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness. Wilderness here is frontier, and it's the border between Judea to the south and Samaria to the north. I'll explain it better tomorrow. But Jesus had standing in Samaria. The Samaritans hated the Jews. It was dangerous for Jews to go, but Jesus could go to Samaria. And so he goes and hides in a place called Ephraim. I'm going to pick it up right there tomorrow. And then notice the third thing. I hope this makes some sense. This is why I just am so delighted the way John fills out the story. But he says, the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem for the Passover to purify themselves. They sought Jesus and spoke among themselves. All right, are you still with me? What he's saying is this. By reason of, now this is a pilgrimage feast, and Jews were supposed to report, but if you'd had any sort of impurity, an open sore or contagion or something like that, you had to, before that, you had to go, if it's been healed, you had to go to the priest and submit yourself and go through the rites of purification. And John is simply saying, remember, John's writing late. There is no Jerusalem. There is no temple by the time he writes, so he's reminding you that the city would swell for several days and weeks before the Passover as people came to prepare for the Passover, to attend a rites of purification. And he says they were standing around, they were in the temple speaking among themselves. He means they were whispering. And they're asking, what do you think? Will the Nazarene come to the feast? So I'm saying that number one, you got this prophecy. You're not going to see me till you welcome me as Messiah. Number two, you've got this miracle. And John is explicit. For that reason, Jesus is a wanted man. He's a fugitive. He is going to make his way with his apostles to a village called Ephraim, and he's going to wait there until it's time to go up for the Passover. But the other thing is, it's so important, we'll talk about it in the morning, is that the whole city of Jerusalem is abuzz with the question. John 12 says that some people decided they evidently hadn't planned to come to Passover. When they heard about Lazarus, they came just to see Lazarus. So Jesus has set this city on its ear. Does that make sense to you? Everybody is waiting. Let me tell you one other thing. I know I'm late, but just real quickly. Why is the stench important? Because you can't counterfeit a death stench. And therefore he waits until when that stone is rolled away and that death stench. Does that make sense to you? The record of Lazarus being raised from the dead is only as dependable as the truth of his death, his physical death. And I mean today the standard explanation of the unbelieving explanation is, well, those poor primitive people, he was probably just slipped into a coma and they didn't realize he was still alive, so cool air and he came hopping out. You can't counterfeit that death stench. Jesus took very deliberate steps to make sure that the raising of Lazarus could not be denied. Does that make sense to you? I think it's very deliberate. Now, I'll just give you a heads up, and then I'm done. I know I keep talking about quitting. My son got after me one time. He says, Dad, you keep saying you're going to quit, and then you don't quit. And this is my response. How many chapters are there in Philippians? 4. What's the first word in chapter 3? Finally. All right, so I got apostolic precedent. But honest to goodness, this is all I want you to send you with this. What the death stench was. So in order for Lazarus' resuscitation in this case to be absolutely historical, undeniable, his death has to be physically demonstrated. What about the sword in Jesus' side? It's exactly the same thing. Jesus is going to contrive to die at the hands of the Romans so that there is no denying that he really died. It's really a remarkable dynamic. All right, let me have a word of prayer with you. Father, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I thank you for this church, this body of believers, and what you're doing here, and for the ministry of various ones over the years, but especially the last 2 generations of Gertsons. What a delight, and how thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'd pray that you would just continue to prosper this ministry, and Father, help us as we seek to understand this remarkable record of the Passion Week of your Son. We acknowledge that we are entirely dependent upon your Spirit and ask that he might minister to us. Father, give us a good night's sleep. I'd ask that you would encourage these people, bring them back, and give us a good day tomorrow. We'll thank you for it in Christ's name.